Jake Morrison stood in front of the big screen on the bridge of the UES Liberty. The blue light from the display made his face look sick. His hands shook as he read the message that had just come in from Kepler Colony. The words were simple, but they hit him like a punch to the gut. All colonists dead. No survivors found. Zephyrian attack confirmed. 50,000 people had lived on that world just yesterday. Farmers, teachers, children, old people who had moved there to start fresh lives. Now they were all gone. The Zephyrian ships had come from nowhere and burned everything. They left nothing alive, not even the animals. Admiral Linda Carter walked up behind Jake. Her boots made heavy sounds on the metal floor. She was a tough woman who had seen many battles, but her face was white with anger. Her jaw was tight, and her eyes looked like ice. "They think we are weak," she said in a low voice. "They think because we tried to talk first. We cannot fight." Jake turned away from the screen. He had seen enough death reports for one day. The images from the colony showed burned homes and empty streets. The Zephyrians had used plasma bombs that turned everything to ash. They wanted to send a message to all humans in space. 3 years ago, humans had been so excited when they first met the Zephyrians. It was humanity's first contact with aliens who could travel between stars. The Zephyrian ships were beautiful, with smooth silver hulls that curved like art. Their technology was far ahead of anything humans had built. At first, the meetings went well. The Zephyrians seemed interested in trade and learning about human culture. They had big heads with 4 eyes and skin that changed colors when they talked. They spoke in musical voices that sounded like singing, but things changed fast. The Zephyrians began to see humans as lesser beings. They looked at human ships and laughed. They saw human weapons and called them toys. They thought humans were like children who had just learned to walk. The first fights started small. Zephyrian ships would block human trade routes. They would scan human ships without asking. When humans complained, the aliens would say they were just keeping space safe from dangerous primitives. Then came the attacks on mining stations. The Zephyrians said humans were taking resources that belonged to more advanced races. They destroyed 3 human bases before the government could even respond. Each time, they left no survivors. Dr. Alex Bennett came onto the bridge carrying a data pad. He was the ship's expert on alien life and had been studying the Zephyrians since first contact. His hair was messy and his clothes were wrinkled. He had not slept much in the past few days. "Admiral," he said to Carter, "I have been looking at Zephyrian battle records. They have never fought a species like us before." Carter looked at him with tired eyes. "What do you mean?" Bennett pulled up files on his pad. Every race they conquered before was either more advanced than them or much weaker. They have never faced a species that was close to their technology level, but thought differently. Jake looked at the data. The Zephyrians had taken over 12 different alien races in the past 1,000 years. Some were primitive and fell quickly. Others were more advanced but too peaceful to fight well. None had given them a real war. "They study our technology and think they know us," Bennett continued. "But they do not understand human psychology. They have never seen what humans do when they get really angry." Carter's eyes got harder. "Are you saying we have advantages they do not know about?" Bennett nodded. "Humans evolved as hunters. We tracked animals for days without stopping. We survived ice ages and plagues and wars that would have killed other species. We adapt faster than any race they have met before." The bridge was quiet for a moment. Everyone was thinking about what Bennett had said. Outside the windows, stars looked cold and distant. Somewhere out there, Zephyrian fleets were moving toward more human worlds. A communication officer called out from across the bridge. "Admiral, we are getting messages from Earth Command. They want to speak with you right away." Carter walked to the communication station. The big screen changed to show Admiral Peterson, the head of human space forces. His face was grim and his uniform was perfect as always. Behind him, Jake could see other officers moving around with urgent steps. "Linda," Peterson said without any greeting, "we have made a decision. The diplomatic mission is over. We are pulling back all negotiation teams and activating military protocols. Carter stood straighter. What are your orders, sir? Every human world is mobilizing for war. We are calling up reserves and activating all defense fleets, but that is not all. Peterson paused and looked directly at Carter. We are also starting Operation Prometheus. Jake felt his blood turn cold. He had heard whispers about Prometheus in military circles. It was a project that had been planned but never used because it was considered too dangerous. Even the name was classified above his security level. Sir, Carter said carefully, are you sure that is necessary? Peterson's face was like stone. They killed 50,000 civilians, Linda. Men, women, children who never hurt anyone. They think we are weak because we offered peace first. It is time to show them what humans are really capable of. The connection ended, and the bridge was quiet again. Carter stood still for a long moment, staring at the empty screen. When she finally turned around, her face had changed. The diplomatic officer was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Bennett, she said, I want you to compile everything we know about Zephyrian psychology, their fleet movements and their weaknesses. Everything. Yes, Admiral. Jake, prepare the ship for combat operations. We are going to be part of something big. She looked around the bridge at all, the officers. The Zephyrians wanted a war. They are about to learn why that was the worst mistake they could have made. As the Liberty turned toward human space, Jake felt something change in the air. It was like the moment before a storm hits, when everything gets quiet and the wind stops blowing. Humanity had been patient and diplomatic for 3 years. But patience had limits, and the Zephyrians had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In the depths of space, human fleets began to move. On every human world, factories started working day and night to build weapons. In secret labs, scientists opened files that had been locked away. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed humanity too far. The war was beginning, and it would change everything. General Ryan Parker stood in the war room deep inside Luna Command. The room was filled with screens showing every human world in space. Red dots marked Zephyrian fleet positions. Blue dots showed human ships moving into position. In just 2 weeks, humanity had put together the largest military force in their history. The mobilization was like nothing anyone had seen before. Every human colony sent ships and soldiers. Mining worlds stopped digging for metals and started building weapons instead. Even the peaceful research stations were making bombs and battle plans. Dr. Susan Hayes walked into the room carrying a thick file. She was the head of the Psychological Warfare Division, a group that had been formed just days ago. Her job was to figure out how to use human nature as a weapon against the aliens. General, she said, putting the file on the big table in the center of the room. We have finished our analysis of human advantages in warfare. Parker looked up from a battle plan he was studying. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp. He had been working without sleep for days, coordinating the massive war effort. What did you find? Hayes opened the file and pulled out charts and graphs. Humans are different from every other species the Zephyrians have fought. We evolved as persistence hunters. Our ancestors would chase animals for days until they collapsed from exhaustion. She pointed to a chart showing human brain scans. When humans get angry or threatened, our brains release chemicals that make us stronger, faster, and less sensitive to pain. We call it adrenaline, but it is more than that. We can enter a state where we ignore our own safety completely. Parker studied the charts. You are talking about berserker rage. Exactly, but we can control it and direct it. Other species fight logically. They calculate risks and retreat when the cost gets too high. Humans can choose to keep fighting even when logic says to stop. Across the room, communication officers were coordinating with fleet commanders throughout human space. Captain Nicole Davis was leading the first attack group toward the Zephyrian mining world of Zerion 7. Her fleet was smaller than the alien defenders, but that was part of the plan. The Zephyrians expected humans to fight like other civilized species. They thought space battles were about who had better technology and more ships. They used careful formations and followed ancient rules of engagement that had been used in the galaxy for thousands of years. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Captain Davis stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Fury. Around her, the attack fleet moved through space like a pack of wolves. The ships were painted black to blend with the darkness between stars. Their weapon systems had been modified in ways that violated every treaty on civilized warfare. Contact with Zephyrian fleet in 10 minutes, her tactical officer reported. Davis nodded. She had read her orders 3 times to make sure she understood them correctly. The rules of engagement were simple. There were no rules. Humanity was done being civilized. On Zirion 7, Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Defense Fleet watched the human ships approach. His 4 eyes tracked their movement patterns with growing confusion. The humans were not using standard attack formations. Their ships moved in chaotic groups that made no tactical sense. They are either very foolish or very desperate, he told his officers. Prepare to destroy them quickly so we can return to mining operations. The battle started normally. Both fleets opened fire at long range with energy weapons. Zephyrian shields held strong while human ships took damage. It looked like every other battle the aliens had fought for centuries. Then something changed. The human ships suddenly accelerated toward the Zephyrian fleet instead of retreating. They did not try to match formations or fight at safe distances. They rushed forward like wild animals attacking prey. The first human ship to reach the enemy line was the destroyer UES Vengeance. Instead of firing weapons and pulling back, it rammed straight into a Zephyrian cruiser. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire and metal. Admiral Kethvar could not believe what he was seeing. Did they just sacrifice their own ship to destroy one of ours? Before anyone could answer, more human ships were doing the same thing. They used their own ships as weapons, ramming into Zephyrian vessels or getting close enough to detonate their reactors like bombs. Each human ship that died took at least one alien ship with it. The Zephyrians had never seen anything like this. In their culture, losing ships was a sign of poor planning. No civilized species would trade ships equally when they could retreat and fight another day. But the humans seemed to think trading ships was a good deal. Captain Davis watched her fleet tear into the enemy formation. Half her ships were gone, but the Zephyrian fleet was in chaos. Their careful battle lines had collapsed. Their commanders were sending panicked messages to each other. All ships, she broadcast on the human fleet channel. Remember why we are here. Remember Kepler Colony. Make every shot count. The human ships that survived the ramming attacks opened fire at point-blank range. They targeted Zephyrian ships that were damaged or confused. They showed no mercy and asked for no quarter. When Zephyrian ships tried to surrender, the humans destroyed them anyway. In 3 hours, the battle was over. The Zephyrian mining fleet was completely destroyed. The humans had lost 2/3 of their ships, but they had won. More importantly, they had sent a message to every alien in the galaxy. Admiral Kethvar's final transmission was broadcast across Zephyrian space. His voice was filled with something the aliens rarely felt: fear. Command, this is Admiral Kethvar. The human fleet has destroyed our entire force. They fight like mad animals. They show no regard for their own lives. They use their ships as weapons. Request immediate reinforcements and advice on how to combat this new form of warfare. The message was intercepted by human intelligence and broadcast on every human world. People cheered in the streets when they heard the fear in the alien's voice. For the first time since the war started, humans felt like they could win. But the victory at Zirion 7 was just the beginning. General Parker was already planning the next phase of the war. Operation Prometheus was entering its second stage, and the weapons being prepared were far worse than ramming ships. Dr. Hayes received reports from the battle and began updating her psychological profiles. The Zephyrians were starting to crack. Their commanders were making mistakes because they could not understand human tactics. Fear was spreading through their fleets faster than any virus. "General," she said to Parker, "the aliens are starting to break down psychologically. They cannot process the idea of soldiers who will die willingly to complete a mission." Parker smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then we keep pushing. We show them that every human they kill just makes the rest of us angrier." Word of the human victory spread to other alien species throughout the galaxy. The Centauri Federation held emergency meetings. The Andromedan Republic began moving their fleets away from human space. Everyone was asking the same question. What kind of species fights like that? Some aliens began to understand what they were really facing. Humans were not just another technological species that had learned to travel between stars. They were predators that had evolved to hunt in packs and never give up. They had taken their hunting instincts and applied them to warfare on a galactic scale. The Zephyrians had made the worst possible mistake. They had attacked humanity's children and expected the parents to negotiate. Instead, they had awakened something that should have stayed sleeping. They had turned diplomats into warriors and scientists into weapon makers. As human fleets moved toward their next targets, the galaxy began to understand a new truth. In a universe full of advanced civilizations, the species that remembered how to be monsters would inherit everything. The war was just beginning, and humanity was learning to enjoy it. Colonel Matt Rodriguez stood at the edge of the dropship's cargo bay, looking down at the alien world below. Cathara Prime was the fortress world of the Zephyrian Empire, home to their military command and 10 million alien soldiers. It had never been successfully attacked in over 800 years. Today, that was going to change. The planet's surface was covered with massive cities made of silver metal and blue crystal. Defensive towers reached up into the sky like needles, each one armed with weapons that could destroy a battleship. The Zephyrians had built this world to be unbreakable, but they had never faced human marines before. Rodriguez looked at his soldiers. They had been changed by the war in ways that went beyond new weapons and armor. Each marine had been given experimental combat drugs that made them stronger, faster, and almost immune to pain. More importantly, the drugs made them aggressive, in ways that scared even their own commanders. "Listen up," Rodriguez shouted over the noise of the ship's engines. "The aliens down there think their cities are safe. They think their towers and shields will protect them. They are wrong." The Marines checked their weapons one last time. They carried guns that fired explosive rounds, knives that could cut through, alien metal and grenades that created firestorms. But their most dangerous weapon was something the Zephyrians could not understand: the human willingness to get close and personal in a fight. Lieutenant Amy Foster was Rodriguez's second in command. She had been a school teacher before the war started. Now she was something else entirely. The combat drugs had changed her into a perfect killing machine, but she still remembered why she was fighting. "Remember Kepler Colony," she said to the Marines around her. "Remember the children." The dropships dove toward the planet's surface, like falling meteors. Zephyrian defense systems opened fire, but the human pilots flew like madmen. They dodged between buildings and under bridges, using the alien cities as cover. Several ships were shot down, but most made it through. The first human boots hit Zephyrian soil with a sound like thunder. What happened next had never been seen before in galactic warfare. Human Marines poured out of their ships and immediately began fighting in ways that broke every rule of civilized combat. They did not try to capture strategic positions or follow careful battle plans. They just started killing everything that moved. The Zephyrians had energy shields and weapons that could vaporize a human at long range. But humans refused to fight at long range. They ran straight at the aliens, taking hits from energy weapons that should have killed them. The combat drugs kept them moving even when they were badly wounded. Sergeant Bob Thompson led his squad through the streets of the alien capital. His left arm was burned from an energy blast, but he did not slow down. He kicked down the door of a Zephyrian command post and threw in 3 grenades at once. The explosion shook the entire building. When the smoke cleared, Thompson walked inside and shot every alien he found. He did not take prisoners. He did not ask questions. He was there to kill, and that was exactly what he did. Dr. Rachel Martinez monitored the battle from a command ship in orbit. She was running the Psychological Warfare Division's newest project, Terror Broadcasting. Human soldiers wore cameras that sent live video of the fighting to every Zephyrian communication network. The aliens watching these broadcasts saw things that gave them nightmares. They saw human soldiers continue fighting with wounds that should have been fatal. They saw Marines use their own bodies as weapons, tackling aliens off buildings or into explosions. Most terrifying of all, they saw humans who seemed to enjoy the violence. The Zephyrians had never encountered a species that took pleasure in close combat. Their own soldiers preferred to fight from safe distances with advanced technology. The idea of stabbing an enemy with a knife was alien to them in the worst possible way. Lieutenant Commander Steve Johnson was leading a special operations team deep inside the largest Zephyrian fortress. His mission was not just to destroy the command center, but to leave a message that would terrify every alien in the galaxy. Johnson's team moved through the fortress like ghosts. They killed guards silently and left the bodies arranged in patterns that spelled out words in human languages. They painted messages on the walls in alien blood. They wanted every Zephyrian who found the scene to know that humans had been there. When they reached the command center, Johnson planted explosives that would level the entire building. But before he set them off, he made a recording that was broadcast to every Zephyrian world. "This is Lieutenant Commander Steve Johnson of the human military," he said, standing in the aliens' most secure facility. "You attacked our children. You thought we were weak. You were wrong. This is what happens when you wake up humanity's fury. Run." The explosion could be seen from orbit. All across Cathera Prime, human Marines were doing things that military historians would study for centuries. They fought with a combination of advanced technology and primitive savagery that no alien species could match. They turned every building into a fortress and every street into a killing ground. Private Lisa Davis found herself surrounded by 20 Zephyrian soldiers in an alien marketplace. The smart thing would have been to surrender or try to escape. Instead, she pulled the pins on all her grenades at once and charged straight at them. The explosion killed everyone in the marketplace, including Lisa, but her sacrifice allowed another squad of Marines to advance and capture a major strategic point. Her last words, recorded on her helmet camera, became a battle cry for human forces throughout the galaxy. For our kids. The Zephyrian defenders were not cowards. They had fought many wars and conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never faced an enemy that seemed to prefer dying in battle to living in defeat. Human soldiers would fight until their last breath, and sometimes even after that. Admiral Zethmore was the Zephyrians' most experienced military commander. He had led fleets for over 300 years and had never lost a major battle. Now he stood in his command bunker, watching his fortress world fall to a species he had once considered primitive. "How are they doing this?" he asked his officers. "Our technology is superior. Our weapons are more advanced. Our soldiers are better trained." Nobody had an answer. The humans were not winning because they were better soldiers or had better weapons. They were winning because they fought like wild animals that had learned to use tools. They brought thousands of years of predatory evolution to a fight between civilizations. The battle for Cathera Prime lasted 6 days. When it was over, the planet's military infrastructure was completely destroyed. More importantly for human morale, the psychological impact was devastating to the Zephyrian Empire. Videos of human Marines fighting alien soldiers hand-to-hand spread throughout the galaxy. Other species watched in horror as humans demonstrated their capacity for violence. Diplomatic messages began arriving on Earth from alien governments that had never contacted humanity before. The messages all said the same thing: please do not attack us. But the humans were not done. General Parker was already planning the next phase of Operation Prometheus. The Zephyrians had 3 more major worlds, and humanity intended to take them all. Colonel Rodriguez survived the battle for Cathera Prime, but he was changed by what he had seen and done. The combat drugs had made killing easy, maybe too easy. When he looked in the mirror, he did not recognize the man staring back at him. Dr. Martinez compiled her reports on the psychological impact of human warfare. The data was clear. Humanity had discovered a form of combat that was more effective than anything the galaxy had seen before. But the cost was starting to show in the soldiers who survived each battle. The humans were winning the war, but they were losing something else in the process. Every battle made them more efficient killers and less like the people they had been before the fighting started. As human fleets moved toward their next targets, the galaxy began to understand a terrible truth. The humans had not just learned how to fight a war. They had learned how to become war itself, and they were getting very good at it. Dr. Kevin Lee stood in what had once been the capital city of the Zephyrian homeworld. The massive towers that had reached toward the sky for 1,000 years were now twisted metal and broken stone. The blue crystal gardens that had been the pride of alien civilization were melted into glass puddles that reflected the orange glow of still-burning fires. The war was over. Humanity had won. Above the ruined city, the human fleet hung in space like metallic vultures waiting for something to die. The ships were scarred from battle and painted with kill marks that showed how many alien vessels they had destroyed. Their weapons were still warm from the final bombardment that had ended the Zephyrian Empire forever. Admiral Linda Carter walked through the rubble, but there was no joy in her victory. Her uniform was clean, and her medals gleamed in the firelight, but her eyes looked empty. She had commanded fleets that destroyed entire civilizations, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing her soul. "We won," she said to Jake Morrison, who had survived every battle of the war. "But look at what we became." Jake looked around at the destruction. In the distance, human soldiers were setting up camps in the ruins of alien homes. These were not the same people who had left Earth 2 years ago. The war had changed them into something else entirely. The human military had evolved during the fighting. Soldiers who had entered the conflict as farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers emerged as perfect killing machines. The combat drugs, the psychological conditioning, and the constant exposure to violence had rewired their brains at the most basic level. Major Lisa Thompson commanded the occupation forces on the former Zephyrian homeworld. Her soldiers showed signs of changes that worried the military doctors. They could not sleep without dreaming of battle. They could not eat without thinking about their next fight. They had become addicted to violence in ways that no human had ever experienced before. "The men are having problems adjusting to peace," Thompson reported to Carter during their daily briefing. "They keep asking when the next war will start." Carter nodded grimly. She had expected this. The combat drugs that made human soldiers so effective in battle also made it impossible for them to return to normal life. They had created the perfect warriors by destroying the people those warriors used to be. Dr. Susan Hayes published her final report on human psychological warfare. The document was classified at the highest levels because its conclusions were too dangerous for the general public to read. Humanity had not just defeated the Zephyrians through superior violence. They had terrified every other species in the galaxy into complete submission. The galaxy was now safer for humans than it had ever been. Trade flowed freely through space. No alien species dared to challenge human territory or threaten human colonies. Humanity had achieved the ultimate victory. They had made themselves too dangerous to attack. But the cost had been enormous. Crime rates on human worlds had increased by 300% as veterans struggled to adapt to civilian life. The combat drugs and psychological conditioning that made them effective soldiers also made them unable to handle normal social situations. Many veterans could only feel normal when they were fighting or preparing to fight. Captain Nicole Davis had returned to her home world after the war, but she lasted only 3 months in civilian life before requesting reassignment to active military duty. She could not handle the boredom and safety of normal life. She needed the danger and excitement of combat to feel alive. "I try to go to the grocery store," she told a military psychiatrist, "but all I can think about is tactical positions and escape routes. I see threats everywhere. I cannot turn it off." The psychiatrist nodded and made notes. Davis was not unique. Thousands of human veterans were reporting similar problems. They had been trained to see every situation as a potential battlefield, and they could not unlearn that training. Dr. Bennett published studies showing that entire generations of human children had been affected by the war. Kids who had grown up during the fighting had been exposed to constant news reports about human victories and alien deaths. They saw violence as normal and expected their problems to be solved through force. Schools reported that children were playing games where they pretended to be human soldiers killing aliens. They drew pictures of battles and wrote stories about destroying enemy civilizations. A whole generation was growing up thinking that violence was the answer to every problem. Admiral Carter had tried to return to her home on Earth after the war ended. She bought a small house near the ocean and attempted to live a quiet life. But the peace she had fought for felt alien to her now. She woke up every morning expecting to receive battle reports and deployment orders. 6 months after the war ended, Carter was found dead in her study. She had used her service weapon to end her own life. The note she left behind was simple. We won everything and lost ourselves. Her funeral was attended by thousands of veterans who understood exactly what she meant. They had saved humanity from extinction, but they had destroyed their own humanity in the process. They were heroes who could never again be normal people. Other alien civilizations in the galaxy had formed a loose alliance specifically to monitor humanity. They called it the Terran Watch, and its purpose was to observe human activities without provoking another war. They did not dare to attack, but they watched with fearful eyes. The alien government sent careful diplomatic messages to Earth. They offered trade agreements, scientific exchanges, and cultural programs. But the real message was always the same. Please do not hurt us like you hurt the Zephyrians. Jake Morrison had been promoted to admiral after the war, but the rank felt meaningless to him. He spent his days reviewing reports from the occupation forces and trying to figure out what humanity should do with its victory. The Zephyrian Empire was gone, but the problems were just beginning. Human soldiers were stationed on dozens of former alien worlds, but they were not good at keeping peace. They had been trained to destroy enemies, not to build civilizations. Many of the occupied worlds were descending into chaos as human forces struggled to maintain order. We are good at breaking things, Jake told his staff during a planning meeting, but we do not know how to fix them. The economic costs of the war were also becoming clear. Humanity had spent enormous resources building weapons and training soldiers. Now they had the most powerful military in the galaxy, but their civilian infrastructure was falling apart. Many human worlds were struggling to feed their populations. Dr. Lee published a study on the long-term effects of human warfare tactics. His conclusions were disturbing. Humanity had proven that they could defeat any enemy through the application of overwhelming violence. But violence was becoming their only solution to every problem. We have created a military culture that cannot exist without war, he wrote. Our soldiers need enemies to fight. Our economy depends on weapons production. Our government is organized around military command structures. We have become a civilization that can only function during wartime. The implications were terrifying. Humanity now controlled a significant portion of the galaxy, but they were discovering that ruling through fear was different from ruling through respect. The other alien species obeyed human commands, but they also hated and feared everything humanity represented. Young humans who had not fought in the war looked at the veterans with a mixture of awe and horror. These were the people who had saved humanity from extinction, but they were also people who could kill without hesitation or remorse. They were heroes and monsters at the same time. General Parker, who had coordinated the entire war effort, retired to a military hospital where he spent his days staring out the window. He rarely spoke to anyone, but when he did, he always asked the same question. Was it worth it? Nobody had a good answer for him. The galaxy was indeed at peace, but it was the peace of the graveyard. Everyone was quiet because they were afraid to make noise. Humanity had won the war by becoming the most frightening species in known space. They had learned the ultimate lesson about survival. In a universe full of advanced civilizations, the species that retained its capacity for unlimited violence would inherit everything. Now they had to live with the knowledge of what they were capable of doing and what they had already done. 5 years after the war ended, Jake Morrison sat in a small apartment on Earth, staring out at a city that no longer felt like home. The victory parades had ended long ago. The celebrations had faded into memory. The medals and honors meant nothing now. What remained was the weight of what humanity had done and what they had become. The apartment was simple and clean, but Jake rarely left it. Outside his window, the city looked normal. People walked on sidewalks. Children played in parks, and traffic moved through streets just like it had before the war. But everything was different now, changed in ways that most people could not see. Crime had become a serious problem on every human world. Veterans who could not adjust to civilian life turned to violence to solve their problems. The combat drugs and psychological conditioning that had made them effective soldiers also made them dangerous citizens. Many carried weapons and saw threats everywhere they looked. Police forces had to be expanded and militarized to deal with the veteran crime problem. Regular cops could not handle soldiers who had been trained to kill aliens with their bare hands. Special units were created to arrest veterans without getting killed in the process. Jake remembered Captain Davis, who had died in a shootout with police 6 months after returning home. She had been trying to rob a bank because she said civilian life was too boring. The police found a note in her pocket that said she missed the war and wanted to feel alive again. The economic changes were even more disturbing. Human society had reorganized itself around permanent warfare. Weapons factories that had been built to fight the Zephyrians continued operating at full capacity. The government said they needed to be ready for the next threat, but many people suspected the real reason was that millions of jobs depended on making instruments of death. Dr. Rachel Martinez had published studies showing that human children, born after the war, were different from previous generations. They were more aggressive, less empathetic, and more likely to see violence as a normal way to solve problems. The war had changed human culture at the genetic level. Schools now taught military tactics alongside mathematics and science. Children learned to march in formation and handle weapons before they learned to read. The government said this was necessary for national defense, but critics argued that humanity was raising a generation of soldiers who would never know peace. Jake often thought about Admiral Carter and her final message. She had been right. Humanity had won everything and lost themselves. They controlled half the galaxy now, but they had become a species that other civilizations feared and hated. The Terran Watch continued monitoring human activities from a safe distance. The Alien Alliance had grown to include every major species in the galaxy, except humanity. They shared information about human fleet movements and warned each other about any signs of human aggression. Ambassador Maria Gonzalez was one of the few humans trying to rebuild diplomatic relationships with other species. Her job was almost impossible because every alien government remembered what humans had done to the Zephyrians. They were polite and cooperative, but the fear in their voices was obvious. "They think we are monsters," she reported to the Human Council. "They trade with us and follow our commands, but only because they are afraid we will do to them what we did to the Zephyrians." The council members nodded grimly. They had achieved the ultimate goal of any military: complete victory over all potential enemies. But victory through terror was different from victory through strength or diplomacy. It created a galaxy where everyone hated the winners. Dr. Kevin Lee had continued studying the psychological effects of the war on human society. His latest research showed that veterans were not the only ones affected. Even civilians who had never left Earth showed signs of what he called cultural trauma. The knowledge of what their species was capable of doing had changed how humans saw themselves. "We used to think of ourselves as explorers and builders," he wrote in his final report. "Now we know we are killers. That knowledge has infected every aspect of human culture." Young people who had grown up during the war could not imagine a world without the threat of violence. They saw military service as the highest calling and civilian life as boring and meaningless. Many volunteered for dangerous assignments on occupied alien worlds just to experience the excitement their parents had felt during the war. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Foster commanded a human garrison on a former Zephyrian world. His soldiers were supposed to maintain peace and help rebuild the alien civilization. Instead, they spent most of their time dealing with resistance movements and insurgent attacks. "The aliens hate us," he reported to Earth Command. "They follow orders because they are afraid, but they would kill us all if they thought they could get away with it." The resistance movements were careful never to pose a real threat to human forces. They knew what had happened to the Zephyrians when they fought humanity directly. Instead, they used sabotage and terrorism to make life difficult for the occupying forces. Human soldiers responded to these attacks with overwhelming force. When a bomb killed 2 Marines, they would destroy an entire alien city block. When rebels assassinated a human official, they would arrest hundreds of aliens and hold them without trial. The cycle of violence continued year after year, creating more hatred and more resistance. Humanity ruled through fear, but fear always bred resentment. The occupied worlds were powder kegs waiting to explode. Jake received regular reports about conditions on the occupied worlds, but he rarely read them anymore. He knew what they would say. More violence, more hatred, more proof that humanity had won a war but lost its soul. Sometimes he wondered what would have happened if humans had chosen a different path. What if they had responded to the Zephyrian attacks with restraint instead of total war? What if they had tried to find a diplomatic solution instead of choosing genocide? But those questions had no answers now. Humanity had made its choice, and the consequences would last for generations. They had proven that they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, but they had also proven that being dangerous was not the same as being right. The human military remained the most powerful force in known space. Their fleets patrolled every major trade route, and their bases controlled the most strategic worlds. No alien species would dare challenge them directly, but that did not mean they were safe. Dr. Bennett published a study on long-term galactic stability that painted a grim picture. The current peace was based entirely on fear of human retaliation, but fear was not a stable foundation for civilization. Eventually, the other species would find ways to resist or escape human control. We have created a galaxy where everyone hates us, he concluded. That is not sustainable in the long term. Jake understood what Bennett meant. Humanity had won the war by becoming monsters, but monsters could not build lasting civilizations. They could only destroy and terrorize until eventually someone found a way to stop them. As he sat in his apartment watching the sun set over a world that no longer felt like home, Jake thought about the 50,000 colonists who had died on Kepler. Their deaths had started a war that saved humanity from extinction, but the price of that salvation had been humanity's innocence. The war had taught the galaxy an important lesson. Humans were not just another species that had learned to travel between stars. They were predators that had evolved to hunt in packs and never give up. When threatened, they would respond with violence that shocked even themselves. Other species would remember that lesson for centuries to come. They would teach their children about the humans who destroyed an entire civilization to avenge their dead. They would build their defenses and plan their strategies around the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy lived a species that could choose to become pure violence when necessary. Humanity had unleashed their fury and discovered that they were very good at being furious. They had won everything they wanted and lost everything they valued. They had become the rulers of a galaxy that feared and hated them. Jake Morrison was one of the few humans left who remembered what his species had been like before the war. He carried the knowledge of what they had become and the weight of what they had done. He had survived the war, but sometimes he wondered if that was truly a blessing. In the end, humanity had learned the ultimate truth about their place in the universe. They were not the heroes of their own story. They were the monsters that other species warned their children about. And they would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of their existence.